And that's a great segue into our very first speaker this morning, Dr. Fermi Okanlami. And I want to tell you, I met him close to the end of last year at another conference, and I was determined to have him here today. His presentation is powerful. He is a physician leader at the University of Michigan and also UCLA. He's the director of the Student Accessibility and Accommodation Services, also assistant professor in many specialties of family medicine, physical medicine and rehabilitation, and urology. And he's also an adjunct professor in orthopedic surgery at the David Geffen School of Medicine at UCLA. He received his MD degree from University of Michigan and has stayed on there as faculty. Some of his passions include medical student education and mentorship, providing equitable access for people with disabilities, particularly involving access to physical and emotional health and wellness through adaptive sports and fitness opportunities. He was nominated in 2023 by President Joe Biden to serve on the President's Council on Sports, Fitness, and Nutrition, and speaks around the country on topics related to diversity, equity, inclusion, not limited to creating a health system that is accessible to and inclusive of both patients and providers with disabilities, and providing reasonable and appropriate accommodations for students and disabilities in higher education. And so it is my pleasure to introduce to you Dr. Okanlami. Thank you so much for being with us.
Good morning, everyone. Thank you so much, Dr. Allen. Thank you, Dr. Williams. I'm first going to do a little sound check. Can everyone hear me okay?
Perfect.
All right. So I always do a very, very brief description. I say that my name is Fermi Okanlami. Most people refer to me as Dr. O. I use he, him pronouns. I'm a middle-aged Black man with brown skin, short curly black hair. I'm wearing dark-rimmed glasses, a wooden bow tie, a collared shirt, and a yellow vest. Now, I tell people that I give you a brief visual description, not so that you get a sense of my fashion, but because what we don't often recognize is that individuals that are blind or low vision, that don't have the ability to fully see who you are or see your slides, are missing a critical component of presentations. And so I appreciate Dr. Williams and what she shared, talking about learning more about individuals living with disability and how we need to make sure that everyone, regardless of their tone of their skin color or the way that they ambulate, the way that they see or hear or think, that everyone deserves access. Now, you can see my first slide here that says Disabusing disability, demonstrating that disability doesn't mean inability. And that's what the presentation will be about today. Now, before I jump into that, I want to tell you first two stories and also a question. Now, we heard what this conference is about, and you're probably wondering, why is this individual kicking off this conference talking about disability? What does disability have anything to do with health disparities for individuals with different skin tones? What does this have anything to do with dermatologic disease? What does this have anything to do with healthcare? Now, the hope is that by the end of this conversation, you will understand why Dr. Allen and the planning committee have invited me to join. And I'm hoping that I will also learn something from you, because I tell people all the time that if my voice is the only voice that we hear today, I think I've done all of you a disservice. Because every single one of you, the multiple 188 Zoom accounts that are there with the numbers of people that are joining them, have a perspective on this conversation, whether they recognize it or not. So we will leave some time for questions, but I am very, very open, as Dr. Allen did earlier, to having you put things in the chat, put comments in the chat, ask questions, and I will do my best to incorporate them as I go along. Now, I said I was going to start with two stories. About 2 years ago, I was giving a keynote at the American Academy for Physical Medicine and Rehabilitation. And in it, I did my classic visual description of myself. I described my slides. And after the presentation, a gentleman came up to me and he was in tears. When he was able to collect himself, he said, I moved here from a different country because I want to be a doctor. And where I'm from, they don't believe that people like me can be physicians. He said, I've been to countless academic presentations, and it wasn't until this one where you described yourself and you described your slides and allowed me to see what was going on that I actually felt included and I felt seen, even if I couldn't see you. And so he said, being an individual that identifies as blind, going to presentations has been difficult because people don't often realize that there may be someone there that cannot see the things that they are talking about. Now, that seemed to bolster my encouragement to continue with my visual descriptions. However, this is the other story. One of my colleagues here at the University of Michigan, he and I have gone back and forth and had a series of contentious conversations around this practice of visual descriptions. And he thinks that it's actually not just a bad idea, but he thinks it's damaging. And he said, I don't know why you, Dr. O, a sighted individual, will think that me, a blind individual, cares anything about the style of your hair or the thickness of your glasses frames. He said, I think it takes away from presentations and people go around in the circle on the Zoom screen describing themselves in a way that then we don't have any time for the actual work. Now, why do you think I told you these two seemingly conflicting stories? I told you these two stories because what I want you to then know is when you've met one person with a disability, you have met one person with a disability. So I don't want you to furiously take notes during this presentation today and say, this is how I should treat people with disabilities. This is what I should do when someone is blind. But what I do hope is that you will hear something and maybe see something that you haven't heard or seen in this way before. It may encourage you to look at what you do in your body of work and see how maybe someone wasn't getting access to something that you wanted them to have access to, that you just merely need to provide it in a different format. And then think not just about disability, but think about all of the individuals that may be different from the people that you see every day, that they may not be represented in your space, and think about why that may be. Is it because you don't want them there? Is it because someone else doesn't want them there? Or is it merely because there may be some access that they need to participate that they don't have? So without further ado, I will jump into my presentation. I do not have any financial disclosures to report. And I always start with a conversation about equity and equality. Now, this is an image that many of you have probably seen before. So as I said, please feel free in the chat to share how you have seen this image used, what the context was in which you saw it. This is an image that has two sides. And in each side, I have three people, and I call them tall, medium, and short. Each of them is trying to watch what appears to be a baseball game on the other side of the fence. Now, on one side of the image, each of them, tall, medium, and short, are each standing on one box. With that one box, tall can see over the fence and see the game. Medium can also see over the fence and see the game. Short cannot see over or through the fence and see the game. Under this side, it says the word equality. Now, on the other side of the same image, the same three people are there, but now the boxes have been moved such that tall is not standing on any box at all and can see the game. Medium is still standing on their one box and can see the game, but now short is standing on two boxes and can see the game. Under this side, it says the word equity. Now, I'm going to encourage you to get your fingers going and to continue trying to share how you've seen this image used, but many times people see this image in conversations around diversity, equity, and inclusion. They see it in conversations around access, in leadership presentations, and the purpose is often to say that equity and equality are not the same thing. That equity is giving people what they need to have access, whereas equality is giving everyone the same thing regardless of what they need. Now, I use this slide to introduce these conversations because when we are in our institutions and our organizations, we don't often realize that these are the same types of conversations we are having. If I look at these boxes as access to resources, do we provide the resources in a way that those with the greatest need get the resources that they need? Or do we talk about giving the resources to everyone equally in order to feel as though we are serving everyone in the same way? Now, another thing that I will say that is actually quite relevant to this discussion, that is not always the case when I give presentations, is that after I use this slide for many months in a row, oftentimes people put their comments in the chat or online wherever the slides were posted. And this one individual said, "Why don't those insert racial slur here buy tickets like everyone else and watch the game from the inside?" Now, I pause and I repeat it on purpose. Someone said, "Why don't those insert racial slur here buy tickets like everyone else and watch the game from the inside?" I say this not to be controversial or jarring, but I say it because what we don't often recognize is that when two people see one image, they may see two very different things. So while most people talk about this slide with respect to saying that we need to give the access to resources based on who needs them and that equity and equality aren't the same thing, people often talk about the slide that they've seen used that says liberation, where there's no fence at all. They talk about a chain link fence that you can see through. There are lots of iterations of this slide, and most of the time people are trying to talk about how you can actually give access to the game to those on the outside. But unfortunately, to then tie it back to our institutions and organizations, there may be times when you feel as though you are having a conversation and you are trying to get to the same end goal, but you keep running into a wall in some way. You don't know that it's because some people see access and diversity, equity, and inclusion as trying to provide something to people that don't deserve it, as trying to give something to someone that does not need to get it themselves, and that they should be in a different category, period. And so I say that it's easy to use these cartoon characters in this discussion when the reality of our world is really like this anyway. And so in this image, we've added a third portion of it. This third portion now has the same three people, but now tall is standing on 6 or 7 boxes well above the field, and short is now standing in a box-sized hole. Now, what often happens with the first iteration of this is people say, "Why did that tall individual need to give up their box for the short individual?" They'll say, "You don't know what that tall individual did to work for that box. And now in this reality image, you don't know what they did to work for all of the boxes that they have. Should it be their responsibility to give up some of their resources for someone else?" And then often the conversation then comes to saying, "I don't know what that short individual did to dig themselves into that hole that they find themselves in." And once again, should it be someone else's responsibility to then provide them with something to get out of that hole? Now, I use these slides in presentations to Fortune 500 companies, to elementary schools, to healthcare systems. And it's with the conversations in healthcare systems that I say we are unique, and that a Fortune 500 company that may be a private entity can decide how they want to allocate their resources without us being able to necessarily argue. Now, I say this conversation is the same in those spaces, but in healthcare, we are to provide access and health to everyone that comes into our lives. We are not to discriminate on the basis of race or gender or ethnicity or socioeconomic status. We are to provide equitable access to healthcare. But I do realize that resource allocation is not something that we can ignore. And it's necessary to have to then allocate resources in a way that you are making the greatest impact. Now, I want you to hold on to these images as I then go through and tell you a little bit more about myself. And I'll tell you a story about how I then started to live life from the other side of the stethoscope. Now, this is a collage of a few images of me. One of the things in my life was that after my family immigrated here from Nigeria, I have 2 physician parents who came to the United States to pursue further medical training. At that time, the US did not recognize their residency training in Nigeria, and therefore they had to redo their residencies. And both of my parents did pediatrics at Howard University. My mother went on to do pediatric critical care at Johns Hopkins, and my father did neonatal intensive care at Georgetown, before we then moved to Indiana, where they took their faculty appointments. I bounced all around the country for school, doing all sorts of things. So diversity was not just a checkbox or a buzzword in my life. I sang, I danced, I acted, I played all the sports, I led groups, and I was given access to a diversity of experiences, of opportunities. And so some of those things were that I played sports throughout my life. And that first image is of me at Stanford University, where I was a two-time captain and an academic All-American on the track and field team. I was triple jumping through the air, and my physical feats were something that I thought were very important. That next image is actually almost to the day about 14 years ago now, when I was graduating from the University of Michigan, headed to Yale for my orthopedic surgery residency, and jumping for joy because of what next steps were coming. That bottom image is of my family, my two physician parents, my sister with a law degree, my grandparents with terminal doctorate degrees as well. And we say this not to pat ourselves on the back, but because my parents told me that education was something that could never be taken from me. Regardless of the color of my skin, regardless of any other marginalized identity that I occupied, education was something that couldn't be taken. So at this point, I thought I was on my way to use my mind and my hands to affect change in people's lives, just like I saw my two physician parents doing all of my life. Until this. Early in my third year of orthopedic surgery residency, I dove into a pool and I broke my neck, becoming paralyzed from my chest down with very minimal use of my upper extremities at that time. Here's an image of me after my first surgery in a hospital bed with my gown on, different leads that you can see coming from my chest, a cervical collar on, and you may see the little remnants of a tegaderm in the dressing that I have from my first surgery. Now, at this point, I did not know what access I was going to be given throughout my life. I did not know if I was still going to be able to use my mind and my hands to affect change in people's lives. I did not know if I was going to be permitted back into the world of medicine. I didn't know if I was going to be able to then play sports. I didn't know what the world of disability actually looked like. I'll remind you, this was after having done all of my medical school training. I was in my third year of orthopedic surgery residency, where I took care of patients with disabilities. After being the son of two critical care physician parents, I still did not truly realize how inaccessible our world is and how our world is built on a foundation of ableism. Now, what is ableism, you may ask? I juxtapose ableism with racism, which is the reason why I think it's pertinent to this conversation today. Racism is the belief that there is a race or races that are better than others, and therefore we provide resources or opportunities on that belief. We think certain people deserve access to things more than others, or that other people do not deserve access at all. We create systems and policies and procedures on this basis, whether it is intentional or not. Ableism is that same belief, but with disability as the core. Ableism is the belief that there's a certain standard of what one's body or mind should be like, look like, think like, act like, that we consider the norm. And if you are something other than that, then you are considered disabled. And within medicine in particular, we see disability as a negative. We see it as a deficit, as a problem, as something that needs to be rectified and fixed. Now, my hope is that as we go through this presentation today, I may challenge your assumptions or your belief that disability is inability. Now, I am not naive or ridiculous in my thinking that it means that I'm saying, well, everyone can always do the same thing. That is certainly not what I'm saying. But I want us to look at where we are assigning the negative, whether it is always a problem with the individual or it's a problem with the way that we provide access. And so with that, I show you this slide that I often use to tie these conversations together. This slide is the same theme from the first three that I showed, but now this one has a different slant to it. We still have three individuals trying to watch what appears to be a game on the other side of a fence. But now these three individuals are very different in themselves. There's one individual that is a bit taller than the others, and they have a different hairstyle, different clothing, different skin tone. The person who was in the medium position has also different hair, different skin color, different clothing preferences. And then the person that was in the short person's position in this image is now a wheelchair user. When we talk about diversity, equity, and inclusion, we think about who is included. the picture that people often see is the picture of that first one. They think that we're talking about only race or only gender. But what we don't acknowledge is the myriad forms that diversity comes in. All of the different demographics and groups and identities that we need to be considering when we are talking about whether we're giving access to everyone. And so in this, while we have the three individuals each given the same thing, which is one box on one side of it, only making it such that they can see over the fence a bit or not at all. When you look at the other image, we now have the tall individual not standing on any boxes because they did not need any. That second individual now has two boxes themselves and very comfortably can see. And then the wheelchair user has a ramp, because what access may look like for them may be different than what access looks like for another. But are we going to decide that we are not able to provide a different form of access just because it is something that we are not familiar with? Do we think that there's something inherently different or wrong about that person that makes it such that we are not going to give them access to the same things that we're giving others access to? And I will acknowledge that after using this slide for quite some time, I finally saw the rainbow in the top right corner of that image. And so now I use that to talk about our LGBTQ plus population as well. So when we are looking at who is at the table, who has been invited, who is represented, I'm not saying that this slide represents everyone, but I certainly think that this slide allows us to have more conversations around what equity and access should and could look like. So going into the rest of this presentation and conversation, please continue to keep that in mind in terms of the work that you do. Now, I know that there may be some hairstylists and estheticians and barbers in this conversation, and I was very excited when I heard that, because I think about my own lived experience now as a wheelchair user when I go to the barbershop, for example. Some of the barbershops are not physically accessible to even enter. They may have some stairs for there to get in, and that may be prohibitive for some. And then when you get there, is there a way for someone to then get to the barber's chair? Is there space within the establishment for someone to navigate? If someone were to arrive with, blindness or low vision or with a hearing impairment, would there be adequate resources to be able to support them? And I'm sure that, your wheels might be spinning thinking, wait, is he saying that every single barbershop needs to have an ASL interpreter on staff? That every single barbershop needs to then make sure that they've got, adequate access for disability that they may have never seen? I mean, now that would be one way, but I know that that's not possible when I talk about resources as well. But what each of us can do is start to recognize the spaces and places where we could provide access in a way that is easy, that we're not doing so. Now, as I said, I like to tell stories and show these pictures about access, and this image is of me in one of the tools that I was provided with that allowed me to return to practicing medicine. So there's two images, both of me and a standing frame wheelchair. One of them, I'm looking through a microscope, looking at a slide diagnosing rupture of membranes or someone whose water had broken. In the other image, I'm fully gowned and gloved in the operating room, about to access someone's radial artery, a artery in their wrist, to then do a heart catheterization, to look at someone's heart vessels. Now, that standing frame chair was what allowed me to then get back to my upright position and be able to do the procedures that I used to do from standing. Now, I've been very proud of this chair and very proud of these images, but I'll add another story. There's a woman who we lost last year by the name of Judy Heumann. And I tell people that Judy was to the disability civil rights movement what Martin Luther King and Rosa Parks are for Black civil rights. Judy is someone who's been instrumental in creating laws and legislation for access, such as the ADA. Now, I showed Judy this movie trailer that was coming out about me, and she saw the movie and it talked about my injury and my recovery and rehab. And she said, you know what, Dr. O, if I hadn't known you prior to seeing this film, I don't think I would have wanted to. And I said, whoa, Judy, I thought we were friends. Why would you say that? She said, well, look at it. It's all about recovery and huffing and puffing and machismo and standing up. And I said, well, I mean, You know, my ability to be functional and active and walking and running was a big part of my life, and I was blessed with a lot of recovery. And so, isn't that a good thing? She said, "Well, Dr. O, you have a platform now. You have an opportunity to change the way that people view disability. If you think that the only reason that you now have been able to re-enter the world of medicine is because you have a chair that gets you closer to your previously able-bodied self, then what message are you sending to those that cannot afford a chair like that? What message are you sending to those who do not regain function to stand or walk? What message are you sending to those that were born without the ability to stand or walk and do not see themselves as broken or as something that needs to be fixed?" And that completely changed my perspective. I will say it's still difficult, and I will talk about this directly to clinicians because I've had many physicians or clinicians that challenge me and say, wait, 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 wait. Are you saying that everything that we do to cure illness is now ableist? Are you saying that anything we do to fix something that may be broken or provide someone with something that overcomes whatever the challenge is that they have is now inherently bad? Dr. O, you are really tearing down the entire healthcare system if that's what you're saying. That is not what I'm saying. While the medical model of disability is what many of us are taught to think about cure, to think about prevention, what we also need to recognize is that there will be people for whom there may never be a cure. That there may be people that choose not to avail themselves of some sort of therapy or resource or surgery or procedure that may get them closer to what their previously able bodied self was, or to get themselves to a place where they may have never been. Because there's nothing wrong with me doing procedures sitting down. There are plenty of people that operate sitting down. There are plenty of ways that we can create access to spaces that do not require that I stand at my 6'1", 240-pound frame to get it done. And that is the way that I have now started to think about this work. That while the medical model of disability still exists, and it is one that I still support, because there's nothing wrong with finding cures to illness. There's nothing wrong with trying to find preventions for disease. But we need to know that individuals that then identify as disabled should not be forced to then change who they are to have access to the world. Because one of my phrases is that everyone can use the ramp, while not everyone can use the stairs. And there's an image that I actually just saw recently that I'm going to start putting in my presentations. This visual is of a group of children that are trying to go into their school building. And this area here has a set of stairs that is covered with snow. And this area here has a ramp that is covered in snow. And there is one child who is a wheelchair user trying to get in, and there are about 50 children who are not wheelchair users trying to get in. And the janitor is shoveling the snow off of the stairs, and the young man in the wheelchair says, "Sir, could you please shovel the snow off of the ramp?" And then he says, "Yes, I will. I have to shovel the stairs so all of these kids can get in. And then afterwards, I'll shovel the ramp. There are more of them there are of you, so I've got to shovel these stairs first." And I'm sure many of you can imagine what I'm going to say next. The child said, but if you shovel the ramp first, then we can all get in. I encourage us to think about access in that way. When we create access and resources based on those with the greatest need in mind first, then we're most likely going to cover a larger population of people than we had previously thought about. If we then build more literal and figurative ramps for access, how many more people are we going to benefit? I use real life examples like curb cuts. When there used to be curbs without a cut in them to allow someone to sort of cross the street, there were times where people did not have access to that curb. But the ADA and things like that allowed us to now have a cut in the curb to allow someone who's a wheelchair user, someone who's riding a bike, someone who's using a walker, someone who's pulling a dolly delivering a service. That curb cut benefits many, many more people than just the disability community. Now, this is another image of a story that I want to tell about how this manifests in real life. So here's a building with a door at the top of a set of stairs and a sign that says "Stop, pass holders and appointments only." I was invited to visit some of my friends at their house about a year and a half ago at this point. And it was still at a time where they were encouraging us, or not encouraging, but they were mandating that we all get a COVID test before we're able to enter their house. Now, the purpose of this visit was to talk about policies and how certain policies had impacted the communities from which we all came. So we all embarked that day, went to go visit our friend's house, but stopped the COVID test. And
Oh, it's
this,
on Bluetooth now.
I'm sorry, someone may have mistakenly come off of mute. And so we went to the site where they sent us to get our COVID test, and this is where they sent us. Now, I was not going to be able to then navigate those stairs on my own. And luckily for me, there was someone else going to their house who was with me, and they went inside, told them that I was waiting outside. They came out, allowed me to do my self swab, and I was on my way. As I went into my friend's house to then have this conversation, here we are all sitting on a long table. I'm at the end of that table.
I know. Let me. It
I
fell
please
off.
encourage you all to mute yourselves if you may have come off of mute by mistake. If everyone can just please check to make sure that they're muted. So I'm sitting at the head of the table there, and there are other individuals sitting around us as well. And rather than talking about the policies that day, I chose to tell them the experience I had that morning. And I said, you have a policy that states that we all need to get a COVID test before we can enter. Yet you sent us to a place that was inaccessible to someone who may have a mobility disability. What if that were something more important than merely a COVID test to enter my friend's house? What if that was a necessary medical procedure or appointment? What if it was something more critical that I needed for my health and wellness that I wasn't able to then get access to simply because the instructions sent me to a place that weren't accessible? Now, I don't know if anyone has been able to figure out which of my friends I was visiting at that time, but I was visiting the White House. Now, this is not, once again, being self-serving, but it's to say that I was invited to the White House to then talk about how Biden and Harris administrative policies had impacted the communities in which I served, of which the state of Michigan and the disability community specifically were the reason I was invited. Yet, if even the White House still has room to grow in terms of understanding access, this is not meant to say that even they are messing it up, therefore we're all doomed. No. What I'm saying is that we need to give each other grace, and I'm the first to raise my hand and say I am still in a constant learning journey about how to provide access. But I tell people that I now cannot unsee certain things because I need access in a way that I did not need it before. I acknowledge that I did not appreciate how I had been unintentionally complicit to this world of ableism. I did not see how I was perpetuating some of these same ableist mindsets just because of the training that I received, the education I had, and the world in which I live, which pathologizes disability and makes it look as if it is something negative. And so now what I say to people is that the past may not be your fault, but that the future will be. So I say, what is it that we are going to do to make someone's tomorrow better than their yesterday? What little things can each of us do within our spheres of influence to make sure that we are providing access to those who have need? Now, I tell you that I use disability really just as this gateway to talk about this conversation, because disability is ubiquitous. It does not discriminate on the basis of race or gender or ethnicity. And therefore, if we think about the disability community and how diverse it is, and if we see that we are providing access to that community, I guarantee you that some of the health and healthcare disparities that we see will be reduced. Because they're the social determinants of health, and I sometimes call them the social determinants of health, wealth, and access, that then determine how outcomes are different amongst different groups. And if we're not directly addressing some of those barriers, we're not going to get to a point where our healthcare system, where our communities can then work to provide better access and having better health outcomes for people. Now, I tell people that I want them to find and follow their passions and make their passions their professions. And I'm going to show you a very short video that talks about how one individual did that for me and for others. So please enjoy this video.
I'm lucky that I have my parents. Every successful deaf person I know have parents who advocated for them when they were young and make sure that their kids had a chance. That's really all we needed, is a chance to do what we want to do. I never really thought of myself as a trailblazer. I just thought of myself, by the way, this is what I want to do and what do I need to do, and you have to go through all these steps to get to the point where you want to be. In my case, a practicing family doc. I've heard from, and I'm not exaggerating, probably several hundred people who have told me that it was because of me that they were able to go into medicine. These are people with hearing loss. Michigan has been very good to me in the sense that they've always supported me. They are very accepting of my hearing loss. When I became chair, I was able to recruit several very highly successful young faculty, and they actually proposed focus on providing healthcare clinically, providing healthcare education for students and residents and fellows, and providing healthcare research to improve the healthcare for people with disabilities of all types, not just people with hearing loss. It's been very, very successful. We're talking about people applying to medical school with disabilities. You have to realize these are the cream of the crop. They have gone through a lot more hoops and figured out how to get to where they are that most people haven't had to deal with. That we're not actually lowering standards when we admit them. We probably are raising standards because these are people who are really top-notch. I think Michigan is always been a leader in equal opportunities for everybody. The two previous chairs have created a culture here in family medicine. In a way, we're kind of counter-culture being here at Michigan, but we also have a very supportive culture where we tolerate people doing different things. We realize people are here not just to only take care of patients, although that's part of it, but they're also here to do research, they're here to teach. One of the things I would love the next chair to do, and I really hope they do, is to continue to support that kind of culture, because I really think more than anything, it's not me, it's not the previous chairs, it's the culture that lets the faculty be so successful. It's not one individual, it's the whole group. Am I impressed with myself? I am satisfied that I feel good. I did what I wanted to do, and in retrospect, I impacted a lot of people positively, not only patients, but also other people with disabilities, and we've opened up a whole new area for Americans and non-Americans who have disabilities to have an equal chance in life and opportunity to bring more diversity and new ideas and new perspectives that would not have happened. I think we have just begun to scratch the surface of people with disabilities and what we can do for them.
So thank you for watching that video. And that individual was the former chair of the Department of Family Medicine here at the University of Michigan, one of the individuals responsible for me coming back to Michigan and having my appointment. But I show it because each one of you could also be an individual that gives someone a chance. Because individuals with disabilities are seen, whether we want to openly say it or not, but they are seen as less than. We question whether they're going to be able to do certain things rather than questioning what access they need to be able to demonstrate what they can actually do. Because I tell people that I've now lived almost 12, 11 years on this other side of the stethoscope as well. And I don't feel like I'm any different of an individual. But I know that I was given access to resources throughout my entire life. Telling you about my education and my family, once again, was not in an attempt to be self-serving, but to say that I know that if I looked at those images I first showed you and I thought about which one of those people was I? Was I the tall individual standing on 6 or 7 boxes? Was I that medium individual on just the one box I needed? Or was I that individual in a box-sized hole? And what I believe is that none of us is just one of those people. I think that each of us have different sort of intersections of power and prejudice and privilege and position that impacts where we are in this world and how we are viewed by others and what opportunities that we receive. I know that being born a man at times is a box that I was given. I know that being born able-bodied is a box that I was given. But I now also recognize that being a person of color in this country feels like a hole that was dug for me. Acquiring a disability feels like a hole that was dug for me. And so none of us belong neatly into one of these boxes. We all have different identities and demographics that we represent that then create this fabric, a framework of us as individuals, but that also contributes to the diversity of the world in which we are in. And so I know that there are certain places where I have access that I may or may not have done anything to earn. But now I'm starting to recognize that there are also places that I do not have access, that I didn't do anything to not deserve. And so as we then go about our day, how do we try to make sure that we are representing the diversity of the world in which we live? Are we providing opportunities and access to everyone in an equitable way? Are we encouraging individuals with disabilities to go into health professions? Are we encouraging individuals that are people of color to then pursue professions that may be underrepresented in those spaces? An important point that I don't say enough is that while I identify as a wheelchair user, my disability is physical and visible, something that people can see. But not all disabilities are apparent or visible. And it doesn't mean that they are any less impacted by ableism. I would say, in fact, that within healthcare, there are many more people that identify as having a non-apparent or an invisible disability than there are with physical disabilities. And their own access needs may be harder to then address because they don't want to disclose their disability identity because they fear that they will be discriminated against. They fear that someone will question whether they are competent or qualified to then do this job. And I encourage you to then go after today and think differently about whether someone with a disability could be your physician or your barber or your esthetician. Think if there's a reason why they should not be given access and whether we see everyone represented in the way that they can. Now, to get to the end and maybe leave some time for questions, this is a slide that we just pull up to then try to talk about some of the ways that we have tried to then reflect that within the University of Michigan and Michigan Medicine. We've got a summer internship where we bring students in to then teach them about disability health. We have a disability health elective where students with and without disabilities can come to then learn about caring for patients with disabilities, but also recognizing that we create this imaginary line between patient and provider as if we are only one or the other. I am a physician that cares for patients, but I am also someone's patient myself. And so I think that we need to stop this dynamic that makes it think that there's a difference between patient and provider. The truth is that I am not immune to the same things that I care for in my patients. And therefore, we should also be able to see that reflected. There should be people of color as physicians. There should be women that are surgeons. There should be individuals with disabilities that are in clinical work. We then have a disability field in our electronic health record that I'll show you an image of after this that allows people to identify what access need they may have prior to coming to appointments. Now, we call it the disability field, but we also include things such as language interpreters. Because if you have someone that comes to an appointment and then English is not their primary language, we need to know ahead of time so that we can make sure that they get adequate access to that clinical encounter. And I'll jump to the end and talk about the adaptive sports and fitness program, which is my baby in particular, because as I showed you, playing sports was something that I loved to do my entire life. And getting access to physical activity, not just sport, is something that's necessary for all of our patients, for all of us. Yet we are not providing equitable access to sport for individuals with disabilities. And the power of sport goes beyond just playing sports and just physical fitness, but there's also an emotional health and wellness component to it. That many people probably know that they enjoy doing exercise for their mental health as well. And so the disparity that exists within the disability community in mental health and in physical health, because we don't create access to sport and fitness, is the way that I chose to take my passion and make it my profession. So here is the image that I said is probably hard for some of you to see, but what we do here is we give people an opportunity prior to their appointment to then identify with what disability they have and what resource need they may need. So the one that you see here is referring to hard of hearing, deaf, or deafblind, and it says things such as assistive listening devices or closed captioning during visits or an ASL interpreter. So now all of our patients can do this prior to coming to an appointment. So that's just one step to try to close that disparity gap. Because if we cannot even communicate with one another at a visit, we're going to have a very difficult time being able to make sure that we hear what it is that they are saying and that they understand what it is that we are saying. Now, the last thing that I will show is I'll show another quick video that talks about how we have been trying to share this access to physical health and wellness amongst our community. The Adaptive Sports and Fitness program at the university is aiming to provide equitable access to physical and emotional health and wellness for individuals with and without disabilities.
Adaptive sport provides that opportunity for people with physical disabilities that might not always feel like they belong, but through this program, we can make them feel like they're part of a collective, they're part of something larger than themselves.
I was born with a physical disability called osteogenesis imperfecta, so my bones broke very easily. And I didn't know that adaptive sports existed. I didn't know that there was an opportunity for me to participate in these sports until I was in high school. And at that point, I started playing, and I was like, this is so fun.
We never know where the next student is going to come from for the University of Michigan. And through our community outreach, we hope that we have many generations of students that come here because of adaptive sports and fitness.
So we were fortunate to launch the Adaptive Sport and Inclusive Recreation Initiative, which has been funded by the Michigan Health Endowment Fund. We've been able to embed adaptive sports curriculum into the PE programs of the public schools in Ann Arbor. This year, every single 6th grader in Ann Arbor Public Schools, with or without disabilities, gets to then participate in adaptive sports during PE class.
Far too often, students with disabilities are relegated to sitting on the sideline during PE classes and not actively included with their peers.
So I was that elementary school kid, I was that middle school kid that was sitting on the sidelines, watching all my classmates participate and wanting to find ways to be included.
We're educating students and we're educating teachers that adaptive sports are for everyone. If you can sit, you can play.
So it's been an exciting sort of assembly atmosphere. They get to actually play sitting volleyball there that day. We bring a volleyball net onto the court and field, and they get to participate.
The Adaptive Sport and Inclusive Recreation Initiative has been warmly received by teachers and by students all across Ann Arbor. And it's our relationship with the teachers that's really driving this growth of this initiative.
Children love to play. They love to play with their friends. And what this is really just doing is giving them an opportunity to play with their friends.
Seeing all the kids just get hype about these sports that they're going to be able to do in PE has been excellent.
One of the most rewarding aspects of my job is when we go and we have our adaptive student athletes on stage. At the end of the day, they are able to connect with people that see themselves represented.
No matter where you're born, no matter where you live, whether you're somebody with a disability or without a disability, you will learn adaptive sports in your PE class.
The goal is truly to integrate and disseminate adaptive sports across not just the Ann Arbor community, but eventually across the entire country, so that everyone can know that if you can sit, you can play. So that wraps up my presentation, but I end with this last slide, which says, if you think you are too small to make a difference, you've never spent a night with a mosquito. And there's an image of a mosquito on the slide. I end with this one because oftentimes people say, what is it that I can do? This issue of ableism that you bring up, this issue of racism that we talk about is so big. How can any one of us make an impact? But I was intentional about the images and the videos that I shared because every single one of us, based on the way that we think about access, can make a significant difference in this world. That within the spheres of influence that you have, just like Dr. Zazoff, if you merely give someone a chance, if you merely tell someone that their disability does not have to be inability, it doesn't mean that you're responsible for then figuring out every single way that they get access there on out, but it may spark a belief in them that they can do more than anyone has ever told them that they can do. So whether that's because you're talking to a little girl with curly hair that's a person of color, or you're talking to an elderly person who's a wheelchair user, letting someone know that there's more than they can do, letting someone know that you believe in them, letting someone know that they are not less than, they are not broken, they are not a problem, is something that can create significant change in an individual's life. And so this conference, this symposium, is that type of difference. Because for the rest of the day today, looking at the agenda, you are going to hear from countless people who are elevating conversations that you don't often hear, talking about health disparities and talking about ways that we can make sure that individuals with different skin tones are going to be able to get the adequate care they deserve. And that is something that makes me so very fortunate to be able to join you all today. So thank you for your time. I will stop sharing my screen here and see if we have a few minutes for questions, and I will address that first one that I see right away. I am a pediatrician and would like to have more information about how to go bringing adaptive sports PE to the school system. I will say that I will put my contact information directly into the chat because that'll be the easiest way for me to connect with you. But then I'll open the rest of the floor up for other questions.
Thank you, Dr. Okanlami. What a powerful presentation. I will allow Dr. Kanadia, one of our first-year residents, to be our chat monitor there.
Yeah, thank you, Dr. Okanlami, for that presentation. It was a great talk. I think he already addressed that first question, asking about how to bring that into school systems, but I don't see any other questions. So if anyone has any questions, feel free to type it into the chat, open up the mic, whatever you feel comfortable.
I will just add a question that I know that had been asked in a different forum in another presentation that you had about having those who can see, they're sightseeing, they are able to walk, to role play or put blinders on someone who is sighted to get them to understand what it may feel like or be like to be non-sighted or a different type of thing. What is your response on those type of actions and things to do?
Thank you, Dr. Allen. What she's referring to is oftentimes people do disability simulations. And I think that the disability simulations almost always come from a very good place where they're trying to then get people to, walk a mile in someone's shoes or put yourself in someone's position to then see what it may be like. And often they'll have people get in wheelchairs and try to navigate for part of the day in a wheelchair. Now, personally, and this is where I say that when you've met one person with a disability, you've met one person with a disability. But I think that disability simulations are somewhat harmful because you're never truly going to be able to know what it is like to live someone else's life. And what I equate disability simulations to is I equate it to blackface personally. I don't think that you can paint your face black and then go out into the world to see what it's like to be a Black person. And therefore, I don't think that navigating as a wheelchair user or putting on a blindfold and walking around is truly going to then represent what it is like to have that lived experience. But what I then say afterwards is, you don't have to be that to then recognize the experience and to validate the lived experience of someone else. I am never going to be able to give birth. There's no way that you're going to be able to simulate giving birth for me that is going to make me appreciate what that is like. But when someone that is a birthing individual tells me about their experience and what needs they may have in that process, I should then trust and respect their opinion and be able to provide whatever resources are needed in that setting. So I don't want to be overly critical of people that have done disability simulations, because as I said, I think that they always come from a good place. But what I encourage instead is that if you are dedicated to them, that bring someone in with lived experience, have them talk about their own lived experience, have them look at your facilities and talk to them about what things that they would change, because that's also allowing that person's voice to be heard rather than speaking for them or seeing what it may feel like to be something. Get that lived experience directly from that individual. And then perhaps you will eventually have a colleague that then you can ask that question to, because if you start employing women and people of color and other minorities like people with disabilities, then you have that lived experience amongst your team, and you can be able to then impact those around you because you have an increasingly diverse team and staff that will be able to help address the increasingly diverse needs that people have. So, and I will say specifically that adaptive sports are not disability simulations, because the fact that we said you can play adaptive sports whether you have a disability or not is not because we want students without disabilities to simulate using a wheelchair, but it's because we tell people that if you want to learn how to be a hockey player, you have to learn how to ice skate. If you want to play wheelchair basketball, you have to learn to maneuver a sport chair. So it is just like another pair of shoes. It is not a medical device. And so that's what we talk about with adaptive sports. With some states banning DEI in college, have you had any involvement in higher education specifically targeted towards diversity, equity, and inclusion? I have. And the conversation that I have about this is, if you just make me use different words, I will use different words to tell you the same story. And so diversity, equity, and inclusion are being challenged, but I don't have to then talk about diversity, equity, and inclusion if I am in a state where that is being banned. Now, I will give my opinion directly and say that it is absurd that those words are now associated with something that is being challenged as a negative. So I'm not pleased that it is being banned or challenged. But I do think there are still ways that we can make sure that we're providing access, because the data is there about the disparities that exist. And by highlighting what disparities exist, without me couching it as a DE&I program, I can still push the agenda forward to say, here is a community that is not being served. Show me how this community gets access to the programming that you're putting on. And if you are not providing them with access, then there's a problem, and we need to make sure that we're serving them. So I think that that's a much longer question that you asked there, and it can have lots of different sort of elements of the answer. But I say that the work that we do, I am blessed to be in a space where I can still directly say diversity, equity, and inclusion, but I know that not everyone is in that space. And so I encourage you to, if you stay true to the mission of providing access to those that need it, and that is what you are pushing forward, I'm not saying it is impossible. You will still get to people that are pushing back, but there will be hopefully less of a direct attack on the work, because the work is rooted in providing access and care to everyone. And that is why in the healthcare space in particular, I am hopeful that some of these anti-DEI movements are not going to destroy a lot of the amazing work that's been done by people like Dr. Williams and Dr. Allen all over this country.
Thank you. Thank you so much. This powerful presentation, I think, has elevated all of our areas that we can utilize this information and make it into something that will be better inclusive, better able to serve all patients, as well as others that come through our door that are even our own selves and colleagues. So thank you so much. We wish you well, and hope to have you again in the future.
Thank you so much. Thank you, Dr. Allen. I'll say Dr. Allen was kind enough to let me switch the order. And so I'll end with this. The reason that she switched the order is that our own medical school graduation is later on today. And I will be the Black male disabled wheelchair using physician on the stage, making sure that every single one of those graduates and their family members have a visible representation of a Black disabled male physician who is on the faculty of this institution. So thank you so much for this invitation. And I feel fortunate to have this chance both here this morning and what I'll be doing this afternoon for our medical students. So congratulations on a wonderful symposium. Thank you all for having me. God bless.
Bye-bye. Thank you so much. We will continue on with our next presenter. Wasn't that just awesome? Just so inspiring. Great way to kick off this symposium.